As Tori was saying, my job is to try to make this as real as we can for practice. So the title of my talk is Lessons from Practice for Practical Obesity Care. The first lesson I'd like to share with you is never let Dr. Fanberg title your talk. Because if you notice from your program, the title of my talk is Putting the Stuff I Learned into Practice, which is kind of loose. There's a lot of things that I practice right now that I've learned over my life. And so let's talk about some of those first. What have I learned? Don't eat chocolate donuts that are as big as your head. Try to book your own accommodations. Always order the small size first. And don't play with your food. You never know who has a camera. So, important lessons. So let's actually talk about some actual lessons from practice that I think are really important for those of us who do pediatric obesity care in our offices. And that's really the next transition. You know, we can have every referral center around the country, but we're not going to be able to tackle this problem if we're not dealing with it in our offices. So let's talk about some of those. First lesson, there really is no time like the present. 10 years ago, we didn't know what to do. There really were not a lot of evidence-based things that we could really hang our hat on. That's changed. There are guidelines now. The 2007 guidelines are terrific from the AAP. They were written, by Elsie and by Bill Dietz and Sandy Hassink, all the leading lights in pediatric obesity care. And they're really marvelous guidelines. They're there for us to really hang our hats on. You should all have copies of them. There's also more support. We've talked about the importance of organizations like NICHQ. The Childhood Obesity Action Network is great. If you're not already a member, I really strongly encourage you to belong. Great resources. There's great talk back and forth. But there's support out there on really sort of standardized care that did not exist for a very, very long time for those of us who are really alarmed by this epidemic. I'd also put a plug in for one of our organizations that I'm on the executive committee for, which is the Provisional Section on Obesity. We were talking last night in dinner about the adolescent medicine section. I think Keith and I were talking about that. It seems like we have to be provisional forever. We're going to be a real section very shortly, but I would encourage everybody to join. We're kind of launching some different ideas, trying to add value to the section for our members. So I encourage you to join the section if you're an AAP member. Also, too, we talked about it a little bit before. We talked about the importance on how obesity care is really a standard of care at this point. There's really no excuse for not doing something in your office. HEDIS measures really demonstrate to us that we need to be doing this, and this is not only a nice thing to do, it's actually an expectation. And just to remind everybody, what are those HEDIS guidelines? I had the good fortune of being on the committee with Sandy and Reggie when these were developed, and we tried to make them as succinct and as concrete as possible. That healthcare providers should document BMI percentile for age and gender annually in every patient's chart. Notice it doesn't even say well-child visits. Just at some point every year we want to be documenting it. We want to be getting in the habit of using it, and I think everybody in this room is really good at that. It's an area where we've made huge progress. When we started this process with NCQA, it was on our first survey of charts, there were 4% of charts that had BMI percentile for age and gender documented in the charts. 4%, really bad, and I know that everybody does that currently here in this room. Healthcare providers should also document evidence of counseling for good nutrition and activity annually in every patient's chart. And again, for our adult colleagues who take care of well, we're all adult colleagues, I didn't mean that right. But for those of us who take care of adults, the standards are the same. It's just not BMI for percentile, it's actually BMI, but also documentation of nutrition and activity counseling. We've also got some powerful partners in this fight, and it kills me when I see this become a political football as it does sometimes. I always put these two Arkansas boys with weight problems up here from different parties. It's not a political issue. We're talking about things that are important for our kids' health. we're talking about things that are vital for our national interest. So we have some very powerful partners out there on both sides of the aisle. There's some unusual adversaries on both sides of the aisle too, but in general, most people are with the program. We've also talked about some other fantastic organizations that are out there to support us. The Alliance for a Healthier Generation. For those of you who also may have contact with the Action for Healthy Kids, they're in all 50 states and are a great resource for us. So find them, get connected. They're terrific organizations. Let's Move has also been a huge assist just to have the highest levels of government saying that this is an important issue has been a huge thing for us. And it's important to connect with Let's Move in your community, and I'll have another slide about that a little bit later. But it's a really important thing. Now is the time. The Let's Move charge to those of us who are healthcare providers syncs up very nicely with the HEDIS requirements. It's physicians should screen for BMI percentile in their kids every year, and the physician should give a prescription for good nutrition and activity. Now, those of us who are big motivational interviewing people, we say, well, it shouldn't be prescriptive. The intent is good. And I think this is something that people can sink their teeth into. I like to think of this as counseling. However, for prevention, I do give out a prescription, and I'll show you what we do with that. The other thing that I think really makes a statement about how current this topic is when I look at my own state, when I look at Kentucky, and I am on both sides of the river, Kentucky and Ohio, and sometimes even in Indiana. But just in Kentucky, we have this group of organizations that are working on childhood obesity. We have one organization, the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, which is purely a policy-driven organization, funded through an insurance settlement, but really focuses on environmental change. And I know that that happens in multiple states, just about every state. It's really important to know what's in your state and to know that there's a lot of action occurring. Even if you think there might not be, when you start looking around, you really find things. NICHQ, as I said, was very active in our state, would be our voice for those of you who came to our advocacy little mini session yesterday. I put the Y on here because we happen to be a pioneering healthier communities state, which is funding through Robert Wood Johnson that really lets the Y become a lead agency, a lead organization in the fight against childhood obesity. So those of you who have Ys in your community, important to check with them. And there are a lot of communities that do have Ys, even very small ones. And I'd also say now is the time because we still have huge need in certain areas. It's a problem nationwide. I happen to live in Kentucky, where our state motto is "Thank God for West Virginia." We lead the nation in pediatric obesity, so by certain measures. And so I always toss this one up when I'm talking with my partners around the state. So we really struggle, and I think it's important to bring things down to a local level for those who you're working with, so they can really get a feel for where you are in relationship to other places. Even if you're on the good side of the scale, there's a little competitive streak that's like, hey, we're gonna stay up there. We're gonna get this thing fixed. Lesson 2. You've heard it. You heard it from Dr. Taveras this morning too. Take credit for what you're already doing. Keep screening for BMI percentile. BMI percentile for age and gender is what we're talking about. And it's also important, you're going to get a lot of pushback at times when people say, well, isn't it better to do abdominal circumference? I saw this Japanese study where that's a really much better indicator, or body fat analysis or fitness assessments. They're great. But in terms of what you can do in your office, what you can interpret quickly, the language we all speak, BMI is where it is, and BMI percentile is where it is for kids. It's especially a valid measure on a population basis, but as a practitioner, it's important to always think about it as a clinical indicator, like blood pressure or respiratory rate. It changes as you age. What's high for one person isn't necessarily a problem for somebody else. It's an indicator, but it's the language that we speak. It's a vital sign. We need to know how to talk about it, and be comfortable with it. And yes, we will get the muscle-bound bodybuilder who has a high BMI. That is the exception to the rule. But in general, it's a great way to start the conversation, and it's at least a way to kind of kick off and say, hey, you know, your BMI percentile is high, but we think you're probably okay for this reason or that reason. So it's a great way to start the discussion, just as long as you keep it in mind what you're really talking about. You know, when schools start BMI percentile screening, they don't like the blowback that they get from parents, understandably. But like I say, it's very important from a population basis, but you have to take it as a clinical indicator. What Elsie mentioned this morning about practicing basic prevention, I think is especially important with our little kids and our infants. Really, promotion of breastfeeding is critical. You know, she mentioned some great reasons why we think it works. You know, certainly kids regulating the amount, the volume that they take in really happens much more with breastfeeding than when you're trying to drain a bottle of a specific amount. So we're probably overriding certain kids' ability to know when they're full, when they're not breastfed. Obviously, easier said than done. It's not, you know, it's natural, but it sure isn't automatic for a lot of mothers. But we need to be able to be there to support them. The other piece of information that I heard, and I don't know how true this is, but that kids who are breastfed are more accepting of other flavors because breast milk changes with what, in terms of taste, with what the mother eats. So kids tend to be more accepting of foods when they're breastfed, when they're more accepting of other flavors when they get older. It's important to encourage on-demand feeding, not only with breastfeeding, but you know, using those good prevention skills that we all have, that we talk about, like you know, having regular scheduled meal times and encouraging those, but allowing kids to control the volume. You control the schedule, they control the amount. As long as they're secure that they know that lunch is going to show up at the same time that it does every day, they know that they may not want to eat as much at the mid-morning snack because they know what's going to happen. Limit juice starting very early on. Again, these are things that we do that really make a difference, and talking about those feeding cues and satiety cues. Also, I think it's a critical piece that we really prepare parents for neophobia, or fear of the new. As I get older, I think I used to say, oh, make sure you try it 5 times. Then I was like, maybe 10 times. I think by the time I retire, I'm going to be saying, try a new food 35 or 40 times before you throw it away. Because we all know how kids approach food. The FIT study that's been done every few years, it's a recurring theme from the FIT study. Kids take multiple opportunities before they will accept something. They'll approach it, they'll poke it, they'll smell it, they'll put it in their ear, they'll play with it, they'll do all sorts of things with it, and that's great. Kids are really texture driven. We really want to prepare parents to not have the reaction like, I try broccoli, they don't like it. A piece of advice that I've gotten from parents over and over again, which I think is fantastic advice, you get the best advice from them, is to say things like, you know, I think we do best when I give them the same vegetable, so it looks the same, but it's prepared differently, so it might taste a little different. So we can find what they like, but they're not scared because they've not seen it before. So broccoli, you know, broccoli's like 4 different vegetables depending on how long you cook it. Everywhere from raw to, you know, cooked down and, you know, served with Velveeta and Ritz crackers masquerading as a vegetable. But anyway, it's a very different vegetable based on how you prepare it. So trying different ways with the same vegetable, I think, helps a lot. There's some great programs out there, some things that are coming out from the AAP called HALF. There's a program that's coming out of the Ohio AAP, it's already out there that's being updated, which is called Ounce of Prevention. There are a lot of great resources out there when you look around for things that trying to do good prevention programs around healthy eating habits. And this is prevention for everybody. Lesson 3, know your community. Every community is different. And I also think that there's a real corollary, you know, with personal weight loss and community weight loss. You know, as someone who always struggles with I always struggle with my weight, and have ever since I was little. You know, there are times when I'm ready, and there are times when I'm not ready. And I think that happens on a macro level too. There are some communities that do not view their weight issue is a problem. There are other communities who are ready for action. It's important to know your community, where they are on that scale, and what kind of resources are there. It's also good to take solace in the socio-ecological model. You know, it is personal commitment, no question. No one's going to have success if they're not personally committed to being healthy. But it also takes the support of family, a workplace, an understanding healthcare provider, a community where you can walk, public policy that promotes activity, that promotes healthy habits. So take solace that you're one piece of this very complicated, large puzzle, but knowing your community can help you navigate that and be comfortable. Your local resources can be all sorts of things. I started listing for this talk the different organizations that I've worked with on obesity projects in my community alone, and I kept going and going and going and going, and into a third column. And it runs everywhere from the United Way to the Jewish Community Center, to recreation centers, to state legislators, to chambers of Congress, to the Children in Nature collaboratives. There's all sorts of partners out there when you look around, and they come from some of the most unlikely spots. And places that you want there to be support, there may be none. So don't beat your head up against a wall with ones that you think should be interested and are not, maybe a school board. But think about other ones that you may think no chance that they're going to have anything to do with this, and they're very interested in doing it. You know, maybe a real estate developer. So you never know exactly where your resources are going to come from. So be open to possibilities. Lesson 4. This was a critical one for me when I was getting my mind wrapped around how am I going to do it. And I used to run the Weight Management Center at Cincinnati Children's. So, you know, Mecca, huge children's hospital, one of the 3 biggest in the country, and just enormous on every scale. And I was the medical director for obesity care there. When I went back into my practice, I thought, okay, how do you do this without everybody else being around there? And I felt like this was really a point where we need to be doing this in our offices. It is scalable, and it's scalable in different ways in terms of severity. For those of you who came to the Building and Coding talk yesterday, we talked about how the bottom of the pyramid is prevention for everybody. You know, that's where everybody should be, and that's sort of the first level, and we're talking about prevention. That's not severe obesity. All the way up to the top of that pyramid, a very small number of patients with very severe obesity, our bariatric surgery patients. Our patients who, you know, are the oh my goodness, what are we going to do with this incredibly sick, incredibly morbidly obese child? So you have to figure out where you are comfortable on that spectrum first. You also have to be somewhat flexible about what your timing is. I'm very blessed to be in a large practice that has very supportive partners who say, Chris, you and Amber, our nurse practitioner, and Rachel, our PA, take care of our obesity stuff. And what we do is we work it into our regular schedule. So we don't have like a Wednesday afternoon obesity clinic. That doesn't work for everybody. Obesity, I think, care has to be, for more detailed kind of visits, has to be relatively flexible for kids and parents' schedules. So we work it into our regular daily schedule, and we allot more time, but we figure out ways around it. It also should be very scalable in terms of complexity. The tools that you use, you want to feel comfortable with them. Some people will work with certain diets and this plan and that plan. We have a plan that works for us, and I'll tell you about it in a little bit, but it should be variable in terms of complexity, again, with your comfort level with that. So you have ability to make it as big or as little as you want. Lesson 5, pay attention to readiness. Like I was mentioning about some communities are ready, some are not. And we all know the story with our patients who some, you know, all you have to do, I had one guy who, Clay, he won't mind me using his first name, obviously. Clay was having a weight issue, and I said to him, I said, Clay, you need to really start paying attention to 5 fruits and vegetables, 2 hours of screen time, 1 hour of physical activity, and 0 sweet drinks. Comes in a year later, and he looks like a different kid. I'm like, what happened? What'd you do? What diet did you do? Well, I did what you told me last year. So, there are some kids that are ready. There are some kids that are like, I'm ready, I'm done, I'm ready, tell me what to do. So some kids are really ready, and then we have the flip side of the patients who are like, you spend 30 minutes with them and then they come back 10 pounds heavier the next year. So, readiness is all over the board. So it's really important to pay attention to that and at least work it in. I really think our internal medicine and family medicine docs get it because they deal with addiction. They deal with smoking cessation. They deal with alcoholism. They deal with things that we as pediatricians, we are very prescriptive. And those of us who deal with kids and parents are like, do this, don't do this, eat that. We need to get a better sense on our patients and families, some of them being ready, some of them not being anywhere near. And another thing, I always talk about my own Catholic guilt when I talk about readiness, because I always viewed it as a personal failure when a patient came back in and they were heavier than they were the year before. What we're really talking about is really kind of embracing that idea that you are there to help them. I'm not alleviating everyone of guilt. I just can't quite get that far into it. But what I can say is, this is not your problem. This is not you devising a plan for them. This is their decisions, and you're there to support them and help them make good ones. I already said that pediatrics is very prescriptive. And the other thing, and this has been mentioned, Charlie mentioned it yesterday, the tough thing about weight management is cold turkey, not eating, is not an option. So we need to figure out ways to navigate a functional relationship with food and activity. We can't let challenges with behavior change cause us to blame our patients either. The fact that they're not doing what you told them to do doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It means they're not ready yet, and that's okay. They may be ready at some point in the future. And those of us who've been in this area for a long time know that that's what happens. That you kind of percolate along, you plant the seed, and it takes a while for that to develop until it finally comes to a point where we're going to do something about it. For those of you who are looking for ways to do it, I really encourage you to take a motivational interviewing training. It doesn't have to be really super involved either. I do a lot of adapted motivational interviewing training. I've taken some official training, but it's what I teach with providers and with teachers and dietitians is adapted motivational interviewing. It's a few skills. So if you get a chance, I really think to do a meaningful job with it too. Tori and I were talking about this yesterday. You really need more than just like an hour to do it. You need a day. Or what I did was I took it I really got into it, and I took it at a summer public health institute in Minnesota for a week. And you just practice it over and over and over again, and you can use it in a lot of different parts of your life, including with spouses. It works great. So, it allows for a lot or a little for you to do, whatever you, wherever you feel comfortable with it. There are an increasing number of training opportunities. There will be some more modular trainings coming out from the American Board of Pediatrics. There are things that are cropping up in residency programs. So keep your eyes peeled. If you do go to motivationalinterviewing.org, easy one to remember, and if you're looking for really specific training programs, those are great. It really does help you overcome the I don't have time for that. Does it take some time? It does, but instead of beating the same message over and over and over again, hopefully you're making some real progress. And lastly, I think it's kind of fun. It's kind of liberating. Again, it takes it out of this prescriptive finger-wagging mode. Lesson 6. Set a good example. We all hear that, but what does that really mean? It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. One of the greatest statements that was ever said to me about community weight loss was from a child care provider. It came from a woman who was probably 50 or 60 pounds overweight, and she said, I am really struggling with this, teaching my kids to eat healthy. When, I love my soft drink and I'm overweight and I'm struggling and I'm trying to do this. Our response to her, and I wish I was the one who had the response, but I can certainly feel this way because I struggle with my own weight too, is the last person a heavy person wants them to tell them to lose weight is a skinny person. You know, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for people who are struggling like we are, for people who know our challenges, for other people who like food, other people who struggle with it. But we're looking for colleagues. So don't try to be perfect. They just need to know that you're trying. Advocacy is important. It's important to be visible to the community. I would also say that office wellness is very important. You want your patients and parents to see you out there. What we've done recently, these are 2 pictures from 2 events that you might be able to glom onto. I put these out here just because these are things that you may be able to do. We did a screening of Weight of the Nation. Dr. Taveras is fabulous in that, by the way, if you haven't seen her in it. It's a great program. What it is, Weight of the Nation is an opportunity. It's designed to do public viewings of documentaries from HBO and the CDC where you show them. And I got approached by one of the hospital systems to set up one of these in our community. Very well received, about 100 attendees. You know, great conversation, build some good support for obesity awareness in your community. The other thing, this is a picture of Rosie Red and Gapper, who are the mascots for the Cincinnati Reds, at our Let's Move Cincinnati event downtown. So these are, there are opportunities to hook up with things around town. So setting a good example sometimes means just using those things that are out there. Don't reinvent the wheel. Jump onto things that are already out there. One of the things that we do in our office comes out of Syracuse and Johns Hopkins, which is Healthy Mondays. Anybody familiar with Healthy Mondays? Anybody know what this is? Healthy Mondays is a very low to the ground, easy to use office wellness thing where everybody signs up. We usually do like a health challenge for a week, or try to eat less than 2,000 calories per day for the week, or we do a meatless Monday kind of thing, or walk a mile Monday thing. And what also happens when they sign up for Healthy Mondays, they get onto the listserv and they get pushed a tip every Monday. Just like this is how long it is. It's like a paragraph that you're supposed to read and think about for that week. Again, what it does is it kind of puts your office in a mindset of like, health is important for me, it's important for our patients. We do also participate in and I'm sure loads of you guys do this. This is the American Heart Association walk in Cincinnati. Huge walk, enormous, big on the running calendar in Cincinnati. The second or third biggest walk in the city. And we do it with our office. I'm sure, like I say, you guys do walks with your office all the time. It's worth it. I mean, I was on the Turkey Day run, which is the second oldest road race in the country, and I was running behind someone who I didn't know who she was, but she had one of our Pediatric Associates logo shirts on. So I'm like, hey, this is good to get your message out there too. Lesson 7, and this is kind of what I mentioned before when I talk about scalability. Make it your own. Base your level of intervention on your own motivation, your own level of comfort, your resources in your community. It's virtually impossible when you're in a really rural area to do certain things, so you have to know your own resources. You have to know your community. You have to know your patient's need. Our program that we have is one that's called Basic Training. We have an office that has 14 MDs, 3 nurse practitioners, and 2 PAs. It's open to other patients, but for those of you who are in practice settings, pediatricians and physicians don't like to refer to other physicians laterally. They're afraid they're going to lose their patients. So for us, we just basically it's been our own practice. All providers are trained in screening of VMI and what to watch for, and basic adapted MI, like are they ready to even go into our program? Patients are then referred after their screening and readiness is addressed. The referring provider in our office orders some basic labs. I do the initial visits, or at least currently I do. Our nurse practitioner and PA could probably do them, but right now that's the way we have it structured. And then the follow-up was either with me or Amber, our nurse practitioner, happens to be like a nutrition fiend, or our PA Rachel, who is a former collegiate volleyball player who's really into activity. Now they do nutrition and activity counseling, both of them, and we all do sort of the same thing, but they just have their own areas where they tend to be a little bit more facile. Our basic stuff is we use basically cognitive behavioral therapy and goal setting infused with a lot of MI counseling techniques. Which means that we let the patients really pick the goals that they want to work on, and they pick the schedule at which they come back. We frequently use local resources, whether that's the local YMCA, exercise program, boot camp, whatever. We have an information sheet that we hand out to our patients if they're interested, because we don't want them signed up unless they want to join it. So we have a basic information sheet on it. This is our lab sheet that we use where we kind of go through things on their first visit. And I'm happy to share these things. These will be in your syllabus too. You can kind of feel free to copy and plagiarize away. We have a goal sheet that we work with them over their first visit. We sit down, we say, okay, now which of these things would you like to work on? And then we work on it. We use specialized behavior sheets from the CDC, and we also use them from places like Let's Go Mean, which is a great resource for us. We have, depending on which goal they pick, we give them, we don't inundate them, but we give them some selected, age-appropriate materials. We were talking about the goal sheet a second ago. On the goal sheet, I can't even really say like, okay, if they pick less than 2 screen time, here's the 4 handouts. Because you need to tailor it a little bit. What's the issue for them? Do they want to do a sticker chart? Are they too old for that? Is the issue, something about snacks? So we have to really tailor it a little bit. So I can't even say like, oh, for this one we give out these sheets, for this one we give out these sheets, because you have to really kind of know where they are. And then also, if there's something that you want to have in there that you don't have in there, make it yourself. So this is one that we made ourselves because we wanted to have a good drink handout that we thought our patients would react to. It's also good, like I say, you can create your own stuff, but pick some good workhorses. For us, we love 5210. It fits in nicely with the statewide campaigns. These are ones that we made up ourselves. The state of Kentucky actually sort of patterned them off of these and this is our office assistant, our admin, Susie, did these off of clip art on Microsoft Word, but you do what works. We have a lot of you, I'm sure, have some smart alecky fathers in your practices or have contact with them. So this is Mandy up at the front desk in the pink, where she was sitting, another person, Polly, was checking someone in, and a father who had been exposed to 5210 this child was in the child care facility, said, oh, 5210, I know what that means. 5 fruit or vegetable servings every day, less than 2 hours of screen time, 1 woman, and no drinking. So, the adult version. So we also have sort of pared down everything else out of our exam rooms and really highlight 5210. These were developed by one of our colleagues on the Ohio side of the river during one of our improvement collaboratives that Tori was mentioning. And so we just cross-share and do everything. At Children's, they've also adapted them. So there's this is a kind of a suburban white-looking girl playing soccer. We have more ethnically diverse ones also. We use the Healthy Habits Survey as a screen when families come in for this consistent messaging. So 5210 is one of those workhorses. We've adapted ours at the bottom where the kids pick on number 10 which they want to do, and then we sign it and hand it back to them as a prescription to be a Let's Move practice. This is an example of the ounce of prevention, the age-appropriate ones. This is the 9-month one that we also hand out at our visits, which are the anticipatory guidance around nutrition and activity. I'm anxious to really see the half ones because I think those are going to be really interesting. Those are going to fold in nicely with bright futures. But again, this is another great workhorse, ounce of prevention for us. That is something that we hand out. We used to hand out this nutrition booklet at the 4-month visit that parents would always lose. So now what we do is we hand out a sheet at a time, and it's more obesity prevention messaging that gets to everybody. Lesson 9, and Charlie mentioned this, pay attention to outcomes. They're very important, but keep them in perspective. I loved Reggie Washington's slide about the parachutes. Just because you can't say like, okay, our BMI has dropped this amount doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing things. Outcomes are very important for many reasons. You want to keep your improvement cycles going. You really want to see if you're making a difference, if you're getting penetration with this stuff. But weight management programs are notoriously difficult to gauge. You know, there a lot of times early on, there are stories about individual patients, and that's okay. If we're touching patients with regard to this issue and helping them improve on a case-by-case basis, I'm a pediatrician for individuals. It's hard to move the BMI needle, so look at proven intermediate steps that you can measure. You want to measure absolutely, but do not allow it to paralyze you from acting, and it can. Lesson 10, organize your referral strategy. Know where you fit in on the obesity spectrum, what you can handle in your office, and what you need to refer on. Know your tertiary center. They're very diverse and effective, and you want to be thinking about obesity as a chronic disease. You want to stay engaged. You want to know your other resources, and especially dietitians in the community. But there are certain things that you want to be careful about. When you have really significant comorbidities, there are certain things that I'm comfortable dealing with, like mild NASH or NAFLD. But if it's anything more than I am like totally comfortable with, I would go to Dr. Bancroft. You know, I would really utilize your gastroenterologist and really be connected on those comorbidities that you are not comfortable with. Don't get derailed by severe obesity. They're really tough ones. You know, Dr. Ludwig did the editorial in JAMA, or New England Journal, about, I can't remember which one that was in, which one it is, but about a very obese child who was actually a social services issue. You know, like, was this a case of child abuse? They were so severely obese. Don't get derailed by issues like that. They're very important, but you can really get lost in the weeds. You know, and that also goes with like bariatric patients. You know, someone mentioned it. These kids need help. They're going to come to your attention. They're going to get referred to you by social workers. They're going to come in like, you must do something about this child. And you do, but don't just assume that because they're there, they're any more ready to act, or that you're going to be really all that effective. This is a chronic illness that is very complicated, just like you wouldn't try to manage, you know, an asthmatic who goes into the ICU every 2 weeks by yourself. You don't want to do this with a severely obese patient either. So kind of know your tertiary center and be careful with it. So in review, no time like the present. Take credit for what you're already doing. Know your community. It's all scalable. Pay attention to readiness. Set a good example. Make it your own. Pick some good workhorses. Be practical about outcomes, and organize your referral strategy. Any questions?